This is the Blue Collar Future podcast where we talk about the future of trade work. I had a lot of people mention that I should do an episode or even multiple episodes on helping people pick a trade. A lot of the recommendations were related to helping people pick a trade in general, but there was a couple that were saying to go over specific different trades and explain, you know, about them, conditions, all that type of stuff to help people make a decision to pick one. That's kind of what I've decided to do. This will be the start of a series where one episode per trade will explain them and the workload, the pay, all that type of stuff. It may take the place of some of my guest episodes, and that works out better for me right now, anyways, because it's hard to schedule with people, especially in this industry, and for myself right now because everybody's super busy and either working a lot or on vacation this time of year. So works out great for me. I'm going to start doing a series on trade work and explaining these different trades. Also working on my house, so it's taken up a lot of my time trying to finish that up. This will just work out better for me doing this series. I've been up there the last 4 days doing finish work. um, I'm actually recording right now. It is 5 in the morning of Labor Day, the day this will be releasing, because I spent all weekend working up there. We've had a long weekend and no work today, but I'm headed back up there after this. So obviously I do concrete, and that is what I'm going to start with because it is the easiest for me to prepare for. And I know the most about uh, the concrete trade specifically. Probably go over other trades that I am more familiar with, um, and then start getting help from people on trades that I'm not as familiar with. With any trade, starting off on this, with any trade, you need to look at the type of industry you want to work in, whether it be residential construction, commercial construction, industrial, um, maybe even like you could say road construction is even um, a different division, I would say, or a different industry within a lot of different trades. With concrete, there are a few different avenues in each one of those industries. Starting with residential, you basically have flat work, footings, and foundations. We do residential flat work and commercial flat work. The same, all of those, you have the same types of concrete jobs available for commercial and industrial, as well as um, doing structural concrete. So, building things that are supporting weight um, out of concrete, that is building basically walls, that type of stuff. So, foundations would be along the same lines and footings as well. You even have doing water resistant concrete, that type of stuff for things like retention ponds and water tanks and water lines, all that type of stuff. Uh, in the commercial aspect, you have tilt panels, which you actually pour like flat work. You pour a slab, finish it like normal, and then a crane comes in and lifts them up and it becomes the walls of the building. So that's another interesting and pretty cool avenue that is structural concrete, but it's also kind of flat work. Like, and then notwithstanding, that's just, basically pouring and finishing. You have concrete pumping, um, all of the jobs at the concrete plants, the mixer drivers, batch managers, and dispatchers. You have concrete cutting, which is a huge industry, floor coating, which is a huge industry nowadays. You have equipment operating in concrete prep and as well as at the concrete plants with making the concrete laser screed operators. So basically, you're going to be running a machine that flattens the concrete out, and it has two receivers on the ends of a blade that gets they receive the laser signal and will extend out and extend out and go down and pull the concrete back and flatten it out. So it takes a lot of the work out of pouring the concrete if you're doing flat work. I'd say rod busters, as in um, working with rebar, like iron workers, a lot of that is really heavily related to concrete because a lot of them are doing it um, for concrete pours. A lot of concrete companies, like flat work companies, when they're preparing for a pour, will do their own rebar, but sometimes they have rod busters come in if it's more complicated or if they don't want to do it. There's a lot more to the concrete industry than a lot of people think or realize. Um, a lot of people don't know what I say when I mention that I pour concrete. And in fact, we are really close with a pump company around here. We have a shop at their place, and we've heard stories about people calling into their office and ordering a concrete pump, and the pump operator will show up, and the people think that they are bringing the concrete, pumping it, pouring it, and finishing it, even though it's pretty, if you're in the industry, it's pretty obvious that all they're doing is showing up to pour, to move the concrete from the truck to the slab. It's pretty good money in a lot of these places. Um, Truck drivers make decent money. They work a lot of hours. Pump operators make pretty good money. Anytime you're doing commercial concrete, you're going to make a lot more. It's where the most money is at. Commercial, structural, industrial, that type of stuff. But it's also got the most liability, the most risk involved because you're dealing with higher amounts of concrete. You're pouring bigger and more complicated stuff. You're always starting early with concrete. We start at 6 every morning. There's not a lot of, well, there is a lot of residential crews that start later than we do, but we usually have our pour time at 6:30 is when, so we usually show up on the job 6:15 and have our concrete show up at 6:30. Always starting early. But with commercial stuff, um, you see as uh, most most pours, if they're a bigger pour, start no later than 4 a.m. And a lot of times they are as early as midnight or even earlier than that. So we actually have a job. We're going down to St. George this week, and Friday night at 10 p.m. we are starting to pour the lid on a water tank. And it'll be 550 yards, which anybody that knows around here, one concrete truck is 10 yards. So we will be having 55 concrete trucks coming, pouring all night and finishing that. So it's going to be interesting. And I hope I can get some content to share what we do with. The sun can really work against you in concrete, and it really makes the concrete setup really fast. So that's why, a lot of times we start early. A lot of people don't care depending on what they're doing. If you're doing footings, it really doesn't matter. If you're doing foundations, it really doesn't matter. You can pour whenever you want because there's not much of a finish to it. Really, all there is the prep and the pour. And in flat work, there isn't always as much prep, but it's more work in the pour and in the finish. Um, with any of these jobs, you can start as high as $20 an hour being even a laborer. That's pretty easy to find in commercial concrete if you're starting off as a laborer on a flat work crew or something. And you can make your way up to anywhere from 30 to 50 plus dollars an hour, especially if you're a foreman or higher than that. Um, a lot of people that are foremen takes them, 5 or 6 years and they're making six figures or more. It depends on, where you're at, what industry you're in, and all that stuff. It's really easy to make it in commercial, like I said, but a lot of people don't like those hours, those really late nights and really early mornings. All of that happens a lot more in commercial concrete than it does in residential because part of the problem is you are working with the concrete's time. You're not working on your own time because whenever you order the concrete and pour it, you are there until it's done. You're not there until you decide you're finished and you go home for the day to come back and keep working on it later. You are there until the job is completed. Um, kind of work through the process of a few different types um, and processes of different industries, and starting with residential. Um, and I can kind of walk you through the process that happened at my house to kind of see what all goes in. So, starting off with residential, you have the footings. The footings are typically pretty easy and they can form them up and pour them in one day and be done for just a regular old house. A lot of times they can get pretty complicated. Basically, what happens is you figure out the layout of where your walls are going to be, and the footings are a little bit bigger, and they're usually anywhere from 10 inches to 10 inches thick plus, and usually about a foot or like over a foot wide. And what they do is they use kind of a laser and a kind of GPS stick to look at the plan and figure out where the layout of the house is at. So they go through and set a couple stakes and grades for different corners of the house, and then they go through and form up their uh, their forms for the footings, um, and then they just pour them and put rebar in them sticking out so that when the wall that people pouring the foundation come, they can set their forms on top of those footings on either side of the rebar, and the rebar will be tied into the footings and the wall. And the foundations also, they have a bunch of forms that, they haul off the trailer. Usually they have people hauling forms out to everywhere along the wall. And another person coming through and tying horizontal rebar to the vertical rebar that's coming out of the footings. And they've got another person coming behind and kind of working on setting the forms, and another person coming behind and kind of working on bracing the forms. And then they pour that as well. So, and each of those pour processes are pretty easy. They just have a pump come set up and a few trucks, and they just go around the wall. It can get pretty complicated when you get higher on the height of the walls of the foundation walls, and usually the um, location, um, elevations of like the surrounding area and the height of the foundation walls determines the size of the footings and stuff, and the engineering will denote how big everything needs to be. And if you have taller walls, it's just a lot more work prepping. My walls were only 3 feet high or 3.5 feet high or whatever. So it was pretty easy for them. And then with the flat work, after the walls are poured, the backfilling starts backfilling with dirt, because when the excavator prepared for the footings, they over dug so that they had space to work around, and then they come through and backfill and compact around everything. And they usually run the sewer and water into the house, and they keep backfilling until they get up to a certain level, and then the plumbers come in and they start running their underground plumbing, and if they have any electrician, any like floor plugs or something that need to run through the floor, they have the electricians come in and do that. Um, they have ventilation under the concrete, which happens every once in a while. The HVAC guys will come in and do that. And then the excavators will continue to backfill, compact, prep, and put gravel in and get it to where it's 4 inches thick. Um, the gravel is 4 inches below where the top of the slab is going to be, and prepared for the flat work. And then we come in and we'll bring, depending on access, whether it's available to pour out of a truck or we need a pump truck, we will come and pour that and finish it. And there's usually a lot more work, like I said, in the pour and the finish on flat work than there is in footings and foundations, because there's a lot more setup time on foundations, for example, than there is on pour and finish. They really don't do anything on the finish. It's all in the pour, because once they pour it, they're done and they leave it how it is. With residential flat work, there's a lot of different things you can do as well. I mean, um, and you do a lot of stairs, which isn't necessarily flat work, but you'll set forms up that the concrete will uh, go up against, and basically you're forming up the concrete stairs. You have stamp jobs, like in decorative concrete. Um, there's a lot of processes that go into there. On commercial jobs, you on bigger scales, you have that same process, but on a much larger scale. Usually, instead of talking about, say, 2,500 square foot for a regular sized house, you're talking about, anywhere from 10,000 to 40, 50, 60,000 on a big floor. The big floors, it's especially challenging for a lot of people, but it's a lot of work and it's a lot of machine work. So, for example, where on residential flat work, a lot of times hand screeding and getting it flat by hand. A lot of people do that nowadays, or they'll use a machine, but they run it themselves. It's kind of looks like a weed whacker almost. It's got a big blade on the end of it, and you drag it across the concrete and call it a vibratory screed or power screed or whatever. On bigger applications, people use laser screeds a lot, like I talked about earlier. And as in residential, a lot of people will actually finish stuff by hand on a floor, like a basement or a garage or something. We use power trowels, which basically look like a fan um, with blades that run across the concrete and they spin around, and it has a handle sticking off of it, and you run it back and forth. We use those, and then we trowel it by hand after that. Some people will do it only by hand, won't even get a power trowel out. On big floors, um, it's almost exclusively by machines. It's by what they call the walk behind power trowels and riding power trowels as well. So it's got, the big, if you've seen the videos of the people riding around on the slabs with um, these big machines that have blades spinning, opposite directions, running all over the floor. That's what they primarily do. So on commercial applications, a lot of the stuff is like primarily machine finished. And sometimes in residential, it's all hand finish. We do a good mix of both, and everybody's got their own way of doing it. On like the tilt panel stuff, you pour it in sections and um, screed it out, whatever, power trowel it, finish it by hand at whatever finish is desired. And then, yes, somebody comes back and uses a crane to tilt them up. We poured a retention pond last year in the fall, and it was a super interesting project. We had concrete that was specifically made to be water resistant. It had a chemical product in there was that almost sealed it up so that that water couldn't pass through ever. Um, and we had, I think, 5 or 6 or 7 pours there or something. And we poured the bottom of it, which was all sloping to grates, like drains in the middle of it. And then we went around the sides and poured at a steep incline and finished that. It was super interesting. And yes, like I just mentioned a bit ago, we are going to pour the lid on a water tank. We're helping another company out. They do a lot of like structural concrete, and they don't have many finishers or many like flat work guys that are um, all that good for this project. And so we're going to help them out on the lid, which is kind of doesn't have to be that great of a finish, but it's just uh, it's kind of like a flat work job. And they did all the rest of it. They formed and poured all of the walls of the water tank, and this concrete that we'll be pouring is the same type of stuff we did on the retention pond, where it has a um, compound that helps seal the stuff off. Concrete is a good industry to be in. It's kind of looked down on for being dirty and hard. Anytime I'm posting videos about uh, working out and doing concrete and doing all this stuff and posting about concrete related to trade work, there's always 1 or 2 people that are like um, low IQ. Uh, they'll comment stuff like low IQ jobs. Concrete guys have the lowest IQs out of any trade, blah, blah, blah. It's low IQ work. But there's a lot of nuances to concrete, and it's really pretty interesting that a lot of people don't see that. Um, you hear mixed opinions of people saying that concrete is the hardest and concrete isn't hard at all. I think that anybody that knows much about concrete will say that yes, it's hard, but that doesn't mean that it's the hardest. A lot of people just want to say that their trade is the hardest just because that's they get some I don't know, they get some satisfaction from claiming to people that they work harder than them. But I think every trade has its difficulties, and concrete's no different. And it does take a lot of training and nuance stuff because you're dealing with a time sensitive product that can cost a lot of money if you mess it up. Um, a lot of other trades they can work on their own schedule and they can get stuff done at their own pace. They don't have to rely or work on the concrete's time. And if they mess up, they can just redo it. If you mess up with concrete, let's say you're doing a wall and you mess up on the form job, that is a big, big mess that you're cleaning up. If you mess up on the integrity of your forms and they blow out and concrete goes everywhere, everybody's seen videos of concrete coming out of either a slab or a wall, and it is just flowing all down the side of the project or wherever they're at. There's a lot of things that can go wrong and there's a lot of things that can go right, and concrete is just it's a cool thing to work with. And if you're working in residential, I think there's a little bit more flexibility and freedom in what you can do because you can do a lot more decorative stuff, which I think is really cool. I really like a lot of that stuff. A lot of people nowadays don't want decorative concrete on their house just because it costs a lot of money, but stamp work, exposed aggregate, where you basically finish the concrete and then you spray all of the cream off of the top so that all of the aggregate is exposed, exposed aggregate, and it looks like a pebble finish. It almost looks like you threw pebbles or something into it. Usually order concrete with a smaller aggregate for that, but there's a lot of cool things that you can do with concrete and in the concrete industry. And if you are ever interested in concrete, reach out to me and I can help direct you in, some sort of direction in what you might want to do. Commercial applications are usually more money, but they're also crappy hours, I would say. Um, Not a lot of people want to work those early mornings and late nights that come with it, or travel far. A lot of structural slash industrial, I'd say, projects are in crappy locations. Um, Residential is, I think, the most well-rounded, and you can make pretty good money still. There's not quite as much, but it depends on what you do. So if you're ever interested, reach out to me and I can help direct you to find a job for you in the concrete industry. And that's it for today. Next week, I will be going over probably excavation or framing because those two I kind of have a little bit more um, experience in. Um, I didn't mention, I guess I'll add this in. You can also just work as a concrete finisher, or you can work as a concrete framer or a carpenter, what they call them, which is just a lot of form setting, which that's the stuff that I think I like the most. I like both because I like finishing. If it's cool and interesting stuff like stairs or like decorative applications, but I also like form setting on stuff that takes a lot of um, particular uh, details because it's interesting to me. is interesting to me, to watch the form setting and then see the finish. And that is one thing I will add about concrete is you, if depending on the company you're in, if like you're in a residential or like a smaller commercial company, you'll see the whole process. So you'll see the form setting and the prep and the carpentry aspect of concrete. And then you'll also be able to see the pouring and the finishing of the concrete as well. So it it's a lot of difference in the type of skills you need. And that's it for this week. And thank you for listening. And if you have a specific trade or like job that you want me to go over, I will be doing this series until I see that I don't have any more that I want to discuss, or nobody else wants any more that for me to go over. And appreciate you guys listening. If you got anything out of this, share it with a friend who you think will get something out of it. And we will see you next week.